and good evening everyone. I'd just like to start off firstly by thanking the Metropolitan Transport Forum for inviting me to speak to you today. And this evening what I plan to do is to give you a brief overview of the role of the Auditor General in Victoria and its mandate for performance auditing, and then get straight into giving you a bit of an assessment, our assessment of the state's key transport challenges, based in part on the state's own view, but also based on our insights from our recent audit reports, and how we plan to sort of continue to examine these issues as part of our forward look program. So just to begin, I'll give you a quick overview of the role of the Auditor General in Victoria, and our purpose is to provide assurance to Parliament on the performance and accountability of the Victorian public sector. So, as Victoria's Auditor General, Mr. John Doyle needs to be assured that public money is spent effectively, efficiently and economically. And the Auditor General, as John just said, is an independent officer of the Victorian Parliament and is accountable to the Parliament by a parliamentary committee, which is the Public Accounts and Estimates Committee. So the role, therefore, is a key link in the accountability process between the public government and the Parliament. The Auditor General's independence is protected by the Constitution, and importantly, this means that he has complete discretion in the performance of his functions and in the exercise of his powers, and in particular isn't subject to the direction of anyone. And so this independence is obviously critically important to assuring the integrity of the public sector and to securing Parliament and the public's trust. And part of our goal is to be a catalyst for continuous improvement, which is why presentations like these are important to us, because they give us an important opportunity to share the insights from our work. So just to give you a bit of an idea of who we audit, we've got more than 500 clients, which include government departments, hospitals, local governments, police, emergency services, and a range of other agencies. And beyond the financial audit mandate, though, we also have a performance audit function that enables us to assess the effectiveness and efficiency of agencies. And this gives us a wide scope of issues to look at beyond the traditional financial audit. That adds an extra dimension of accountability to agencies. So, in particular, performance audits assess whether public money is spent wisely and consistent with Parliament's expectations. And in this context, typically examine whether an authority is achieving its objectives effectively, efficiently, economically, and in compliance with all relevant legislation. Performance audits can also extend beyond a single agency and cover multiple agencies, and in fact frequently do so. And so they cannot be either broad or narrow in scope as needed. A key thing to note, though, is that the Audit Act precludes us from commenting on the merits of government policy, so that's obviously something we cannot do. But also, the Auditor General has no executive authority to compel agencies to implement its recommendations, so therefore that becomes a matter for the agency and for Parliament. I might just skip the next slide, as John's asked me to try and keep this to 15 minutes. And this is just an overview of our annual planning process. And just a point I want to make here is that we produce an annual plan each year, which sets out our forward performance of the program. We're currently in the process of doing that, and the next plan will be tabled in Parliament in June next year. Okay, so this is just a quick snapshot of the Auditor General's role, and I'll get straight into giving you our assessment of the state's key challenges. So this slide just gives a quick snapshot of the financial commitments of the transport sector, which you can see are pretty significant. With operating spend at around $6 billion, and with most of that going through Public Transport Victoria or Public Transport Services. You can also see that the portfolio manages significant assets, valued at around $70 billion, with a large chunk of that being for roads and long-run roads, and for rail infrastructure, which includes trams. And current capital commitments are also significant at around $18.2 billion, which is just under half of the state's total capital commitments, and with the majority of that being for public transport, comprising such initiatives as the regional rail and rolling stock and railway stations. So clearly the expenditure in this space is significant and therefore important for us to keep a watching brief on. Okay, so there are a number of challenges impacting on the transport system that are influencing transport demand and future priorities. And the state has described the main challenges in its 2012 submission to Infrastructure Australia, which essentially revolve around Victoria's changing economy, population growth, and trends and the location of key industry sectors. And the key challenge relates to the shift in manufacturing activity from inner to outer Melbourne, creating a need for more orbital road network capacity and enhanced east-west connections. And this is considered critical to supporting the growing freight task, which is expected to quadruple over the next 20 years. And so these projects have been identified by the state in response to these challenges. The East-West Link, obviously, designed to improve East-West connections. The M80 upgrade, which provide additional orbital road network capacity from the west to the north. And development of Hastings, as the state's second major container port, is obviously designed to alleviate pressure on the Port of Melbourne and accommodate the growing freight task. And the Western Interstate Freight Terminal is also aimed at improving the efficiency of freight movements by creating a hub in outer areas near logistic precincts that will reduce demand on inner-city roads. And this is supported by the state's new freight plan. The ongoing growth and concentration of professional services in central Melbourne also has implications for transport, as it creates a need for moving high volumes of skilled workers to and from the central city efficiently. And this is a task which Melbourne's existing road and rail network isn't expected to cope with without significant increase in capacity. So in response to this, the state has identified the following key priorities, being the Melbourne Metro, which will improve capacity across the network, and the Dandenong Rail Capacity Program, which is essentially a series of projects to remove bottlenecks along the Dandenong corridor to allow for high capacity trains. And a key related challenge to all this, of course, is Melbourne's rapidly growing population, which is expected to exceed 5 million people before 2030. And this is expected to spread the city outwards, urbanise regional centres. However, employment growth will still be concentrated in the city and around key hubs. So this will further increase demand for travel, including journey times and long distances. Also, regional Victoria will continue to develop as a major contributor to the economy during this period, creating a need for high capacity connections, a further need for those, as well as connections to freight precincts and ports and key export gateways. So all of the projects shown here are considered relevant to addressing this challenge, and it's important, of course, to recognise that this isn't an exhaustive list of initiatives, but rather a summary of the state's major priorities moving forward. A further challenge is meeting the maintenance requirements in the sector, particularly for roads and rail. And there are indications that the current backlog in rail maintenance and decline in asset condition is constraining the network's capacity to support current services, particularly regional services. Additionally, the condition of the state's arterial roads and highways remains under pressure due to the recent effects of the drought and limited investment in maintenance, which is creating risks to transport efficiency and safety. And also in response to this, the state has recently made some additional investments in road and rail maintenance in an effort to begin to address these issues, including 170 million over 4 years in the latest budget for road maintenance, and around 900 million over 4 years in the previous budget for rail maintenance. And notwithstanding these substantial investments, these issues obviously remain ongoing challenges for the state. And developing alternative funding streams to meet current and future demand is another major challenge that needs to be addressed in order to deliver the infrastructure and services that are needed in the future. And most governments, including Victoria, as I'm sure you're aware, operate within increasingly constrained fiscal circumstances. And so there's obviously a limit to the range of major infrastructure projects that can be funded through within the practical ceiling of the state's credit rating. And indeed, the state has recently acknowledged that this requires making the best and more efficient use of existing assets and resources, better prioritising state investments and aligning infrastructure delivery with growth, and developing new funding strategies and sources such as value capture and user pays models to contribute to future investments, and also including greater involvement of the private sector where appropriate. And the draft metropolitan planning strategy highlights that further work on developing such initiatives will be a key priority for the state moving forward. So, as I mentioned at the start, I'll also give you Audit's perspective on the state's transport challenges. And the reality is that our recent audits essentially confirm what the state essentially knows, and that is that the key challenges revolve around managing growth in demand for infrastructure and services, managing the maintenance requirements and removing the backlog in the system, securing and effectively expending limited funds, and also establishing sound performance monitoring and evaluation frameworks. And I'll talk about each of these individually. So in terms of managing growth, our recent audit developing transport infrastructure and services for population growth areas highlighted a long-standing failure by the state over many years to deliver the transport infrastructure and services needed to support rapidly growing communities. In particular, our report highlighted the need for urgent action as inadequate public transport and growing gaps in the road network in these communities are impeding access to critical jobs and services, as well as increasing car dependence, pollution, and exacerbating traffic congestion at significant community cost. We also highlighted the long-standing disconnect between planning and funding for growth areas, where funds can often take more than a generation to materialise, as is the case, for example, with the proposed rail extensions to Doncaster and Rowan, first identified in the state's 1929 and 1969. Similarly, our recent audit of managing traffic congestion highlighted that the economic costs of congestion are significant and are rising. And while the state each year invests in initiatives to relieve congestion, it currently does so in the absence of a statewide plan with clearly defined objectives, strategies and agency responsibilities for congestion and travel demand management. Consequently, the state's approach remains dominated by expensive supply-side initiatives focused on increasing capacity. However, the absence of demand management means that it can't be assured that these initiatives are the most economical and cost-effective options longer term. Additionally, our recent public transport performance audit highlighted that the former Department of Transport wasn't prepared to manage the rapid growth in public transport patronage that occurred over the 5-year period to 2009, as it didn't have the capability to foresee and understand the causes of this growth, and thus wasn't able to effectively manage the resulting performance pressures. And our report importantly highlighted that the department improved its performance since 2008, but that there was more to do. And in particular, it highlighted the need for improving planning, including monitoring and reporting on public transport outcomes and performance, and to benchmark public transport operating costs and develop a plan to improve efficiency. We also estimated that the state needed to triple its capital expenditure on public transport over the next decade in order to cope with future expected growth. With respect to managing maintenance and removing the backlog, again I refer to the backlog noted in a recent report on growth areas, and in particular to the significant investment of around $10 billion it identified as now required to complete long-standing rail and roadworks in the more established suburbs of growth councils. And this includes around $6.2 billion for as yet unfunded rail projects, around $4 to $5 billion to address existing road gaps, and around $197 billion in recurrent funding to address a range of bus service gaps across metropolitan Melbourne. And it's important to note that this excludes the $36 billion estimated total cost of providing all the infrastructure needed in newer greenfields that will come online over the next 30 years, and $18 billion of which is currently estimated to be required in state funding for transport infrastructure services. So clearly, the funding challenge is significant. In terms of road maintenance, our 2008 audit of the arterial road network found that maintenance had failed to keep pace with the expansion and ageing of the asset base, and that significant additional ongoing investment of around $100 million is required to address this. And similarly, our 2007 audit of rail maintenance concluded that the state faces a significant challenge to cost-effectively maintain rail infrastructure, and that regional infrastructure had deteriorated to the point that it's beginning to impact on services. And in terms of securing and expending limited funds, again, these issues were front and centre in our recent congestion and growth area audits, which, as I indicated earlier, highlighted the growing pressure on limited state funds, long-standing deficiencies in prioritising investments, and insufficient action by agencies to date to develop alternative financing options and strategies to address the growing challenge. And for example, our recent audits found no clear framework for prioritising investments relating either to traffic congestion or to addressing the long-standing infrastructure backlog in growth areas. We also found no established framework for considering demand management options and alternatives, particularly for congestion-related initiatives, which poses a risk to effective decision-making. And we also recently highlighted that there was a pressing need for the states to explore alternative funding options and strategies to address the growing backlog in growth areas, and that if this isn't addressed, the current situation will worsen as new growth areas come online. And it's important to recognise, though, that, as I said before, these issues are long-standing in nature, as acknowledged in Plan Melbourne, which indicates that the state is working on initiatives to address. Almost there. Shortcomings in performance monitoring and evaluation have also been common themes in numerous audits, where, for example, it's been linked with impeding the state's capacity to address the adequacy of the delivery of transport infrastructure services to growth areas, to demonstrate the benefits of major investments, and also to fully assess the impacts and risks of reduced demand in major road projects and of fair evasion of revenue. And for example, the 2010 audit of the management of major road projects highlighted the need to improve post-implementation reviews of the outcomes of these projects, the need to strengthen business cases, and to better assess the impacts of reduced traffic. Our recent congestion audit similarly highlighted that current arrangements for assessing congestion-related initiatives don't sufficiently demonstrate the extent to which they address both the demand and supply side causes of congestion, or how they may actually contribute to extra road use. And our recent 2012 fare evasion audit also highlighted the need for more effective oversight of fare evasion and enforcement of related initiatives to mitigate the risks on future revenue. So these are clearly ongoing and significant challenges, and this slide sort of illustrates how we're sort of addressing these in our forward program. I'm not sure if you can see up there, I'll quickly go through them. But I'll just quickly go through some of our upcoming topics, which include coordinating public transport, managing the environmental impacts of transport, looking at the operational effectiveness of the market ticketing system, tendering smart bus services and whether we're getting value for money from bus services generally, effectively deploying protective services officers, managing and maintaining roads, managing and reporting on the cost of capital projects, effectively managing freight growth, improving safety on Victoria's roads, and prioritising major transport projects. And some of the other areas that we're currently considering but are just under consideration but not yet finalised are these. And so at this stage I might leave it there and thank you all for your time, and I hope that I've been able to give you a bit of a better appreciation for the role of the Auditor General and our consideration of the state's transport challenges and how we're addressing them in our forward program.
Thanks very much, Steve. I'm sure you'd love to generously applaud, but it's valuable time we're taking up and we've only got a little bit of it. If you do have a question, not a speech, not a poem, not a song, but a question, there's 2 microphones down the middle aisle there, but I've got a few for Steve to get the ball rolling, and there's plenty of time for a Q&A session with our other guests a little later. But as I ask a few questions, if you've got something pressing arriving from Steve's address there, feel free to jump up to the microphone and I'll try and include you. Steve, can you ever envisage a situation where politics doesn't intrude into the sorts of decisions that the Auditor General monitors? Decisions that are made according to the needs of the government of the day, and therefore that changes when governments change?
That's a difficult question for me to answer. Our role as auditors is not to audit the government. Our role is to audit the administration and implementation of government policy. So whenever we examine issues such as these that I've talked about today, we always consider what the policy position of the government is of the day. And our role is to hold agencies to account and to look at what extent they're implementing that policy in an effective and efficient way, and also what the quality of the advice was to government in formulating the policy in the first instance. So, that's sort of where I can focus more on that at this point.
Yeah, okay, well, rather than dreaming of a bipartisanship that will never happen, let's go to other issues. You talked of value capture and user pays as new funding formulas, and you said, and involving the private sector where appropriate. What does where appropriate refer to?
Well, as with all major infrastructure projects, there needs to be a considered decision about how that project will be delivered, how it will be funded, and that is through the usual processes of considering the costs and benefits of the various options and proposals. And so it's not an automatic thing that the private sector is perhaps the most appropriate delivery method for a project. It obviously depends on a case-by-case basis. And so these are decisions that we would expect as auditors to see clearly articulated and argued and mapped out in a business case.
Some years ago, the Auditor General did a report on PPPs, public-private partnerships, which was one of the first times the veil was lifted on the financial arrangements entered into at the taxpayer's expense in some of Victoria's early PPPs. That led to a substantial review of the standard contracts entered into by governments and private operators on things like toll roads. Are you satisfied with how PPPs are being used now?
Look, I think we've done a few audits of PPP projects, not ones that I've been directly involved with, and I don't think you'll find any auditor general or auditor that will say that we're completely satisfied with any particular area of agency administration or approach. So it remains an issue of interest for us, an area of watching group for us, and I'm sure that will continue to be.
Well, certainly in the east-west debate and seeing tunnels going broke in Sydney and Brisbane at the moment, it's a lively area for consideration. Just one more from me, and then we'll invite Graham Curry to speak to us before we hear from Jane Nathan as well. You said basically mind the gap. The gap is growing. The gap between what we're doing and what we need. The longer we put off making decisions, the bigger the gap gets, and the less likely we are to be able to bridge it.
That's absolutely right, and that's, I suppose, one of the strong messages that we were putting forward in our recent growth areas report, in highlighting that this is a significant growing problem and why we've clearly stated that urgent action is required to address this. If this and the sort of numbers that I put up earlier, which were quite significant and scary, I guess, and the reality is that they'll only continue to grow unless something is done to systematically address this one problem.
Could you thank Stephen for his address, please?